Next presenter is going to be Reverend David Vaccaro, Executive Director of Faith Action International House. The people at Faith Action are leaders in the community of immigration advocates and service providers. And David is going to tell us about the programs they have in place to assist Greensboro families struggling to pay rent and bills. Welcome, David.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Thanks for this opportunity. I have nothing but respect and appreciation for all those on the call. Many of the speakers have been working and coordinators of this call on housing issues for years. Masetta, Josie, Tyra, Stephen, Brett, many others. And you just may not hear about their daily work publicly. I know many of them are humble people, but they also recognize that people they work with and serve, their dignity and privacy comes first. But I have the privilege of knowing their daily work through a lot of referrals and partnerships, and have nothing but tremendous appreciation for it. For those who may not be familiar, again, my name is David. I'm the director over at Faith Action. We've been around for 20 years. And we essentially serve about 3,000 newcomer families from over 60 nations each year. And it's very holistic services. It's help with food, housing, healthcare, legal services, ID cards, emergency help for those facing detention, deportation, accompaniment for domestic violence survivors, and a lot more. It's important to note that about 85% of our staff do come from the immigrant community, the immigrant experience. I was hoping to co-lead this today with my colleague Jose, our Immigrant Assistance Center Director. And if you ever call Faith Action and need some housing direction related to the immigrant community, he's one of the foremost experts in our community, so please reach out to him. Unfortunately, the power went out in his neighborhood this morning, so he let me know he was going to be able to attend. Some things that are important to understand is the immigrant community, as many of you know, already had significant challenges, especially those with limited or no immigration status. So you have learning a new language and culture, living near below the poverty line, kind of paycheck to paycheck. And when you have limited or no status, you have limited or no access at times to employment or social services or social welfare benefits. And then on top of that, we certainly know the last 4 years have been remarkably difficult when it comes to shifting and discriminatory immigration laws. You throw COVID-19 on top of that, and you have certainly a very concerning storm. And many of the people that we serve on a daily basis are out of work right now with no unemployment or stimulus benefits at all. And those who can work are often in compromising frontline roles. So some of you may have seen, I think it came out last night, a Jordan Green story today on the Tyson processing plant out in Wilkesboro, a very revealing story of the disparities and discrepancies, discriminations happening with the majority immigrant workforce at a meat processing plant who risk every day contracting COVID. You know, while in this particular case, the Latino, Latinx community makes up the majority of the immigrant community, although we have diversity from all over the world, they make up 10% of the population in North Carolina, and yet over 40% of cases in many parts of the state are due to the major health, you know, our folks who self-identify as Latino, Latinx, largely due to major health, education, socioeconomic disparities. And it's important to know when one person is affected by COVID at a particular site, oftentimes the entire workforce may stop. When COVID first started spreading locally, we worked with a group of about a dozen farm workers locally here in Guilford County who were put up in a local hotel and worked with them around food and health issues and things like that. But essentially the farm was shut down. So it wasn't just those with COVID, but many others that end up out of work when that happens. Prior to COVID, Faith Action had been quietly providing about $2,000 to $3,000 per month for things like rent, bills, and other emergency needs for families truly in need where there were no other options. Since April, we've been providing closer to $12,000 per month to help ensure no family walks alone or becomes homeless. You can see that's 6 times what we had been providing, and that's very it's very clear that the need is extremely high. And it's important to note that working with landlords was always a part of our job at Faith Action, but a smaller part, because we did a lot of different things. Working with landlord now has become a regular part of the job for our staff and AmeriCorps members. Some of those landlords have been fairly pleasant to work with, and we end up essentially at Faith Action playing the role of interpreters and mediators, helping to build greater empathy and understanding between the tenant and landlord, so that it leads to an extending of deadlines or working with partial payments, et cetera. And we have some really good stories in that regard. Other landlords have been clearly disregarding for a long time the housing rights of our clients, are unwilling to negotiate or talk at all, and threaten eviction all the time if things aren't paid exactly when and how they want it. And in these cases, we try and put our advocacy hats on, being stronger in our language, and oftentimes bringing in partners from groups like the Housing Coalition, City of Greensboro Human Relations Departments, and others, faith leaders. We deal with many private landlords, many of who are immigrants themselves, many of whom may have limited or no status themselves, who have their own fears and concerns around working with third parties to resolve housing issues. And it's also important to note that many undocumented individuals have difficulty gaining an apartment under their name due to their lack of the required documentation, credit history that's required. So this further complicates the issue when the home is under another person's name. And in a lot of these cases, especially when you have landlords that may just own one property instead of landlords that work for large companies, they're saying, I'm drawing up eviction orders unless we get cash or money orders. And obviously we know that in many cases, in certain cases can be illegal, but we also know we need to resolve this quickly for our clients. So we've had to sometimes bend over backwards, but also, again, get our partners involved. It just gets particularly tricky when those very landlords are undocumented themselves. I'm talking right now mostly about Guilford County. It's important to note that about 30% of the people we serve or so are from outside of Guilford County, in places where there is not a place like Faith Action. And there's not that many places around the state that has a place like Faith Action. And so increasingly people are traveling an hour to 3 hours to come visit us and work with us, but they don't have a lot of these other community partners and such to resolve these issues. So it's a lot more difficult for those folks. There are cases that sadly we can't resolve, and people do end up having to leave. It's rare. Our staff have had a tremendous amount of success in preventing evictions, but there are cases occasionally when we can't. This was happening prior to COVID. So we try to be very much solutions-minded at Faith Action. So we created a housing network of our volunteers to provide essentially temporary housing for people who may have faced eviction, for domestic violence survivors that had to leave immediately, et cetera. So people could avoid or limit time in shelters and get back on their feet and at least bide them 3 weeks to 3 months. Given COVID, most people in our housing network now are not in a place to really invite people into their homes to live. And so finding housing options during COVID-19 has been very complicated. We just received a call yesterday about an ICE detainee who is ready to be released due to COVID concerns, not concerns that this person may have it, but rather that the country that they would be deported to is not willing to take them currently because of COVID concern. And so, it's a real trick to find out how are we going to provide. Finding temporary housing, we can step up to provide that for a while, but how do we set this person up for success for the next several months to years? So it's going to be challenging. What we've discovered through this process, especially now, is that there is a lot of solidarity and goodwill in our community. So the main point I want to share is where government entities at the local, at the county, at the state or federal levels fall short in funding or in response. I'm a huge believer that people, faith communities and others can step up and have stepped up in some very powerful ways, whether it's through funding, housing people themselves. And I think we need to increasingly get creative in that regard. push on the governmental means. There's no doubt that that is a huge part of what needs to change here. But again, where they fall short or unwilling to do something, we do still have a lot of power within our own hands to find some creative solutions, like the housing network. We also created a few years ago a listserv of about 100 individuals, uniquely for Faith Action clients, similar to a model that a lot of, called the GCAN model, that a lot of congregations used as well. I know Macetta's on the call as well. We just didn't want to overburden that listserv with the amount of cases that we had. But essentially, sending out cases anonymously to this group of this listserv, and whoever can step up to say, I can help with $200 of that rent, I can help out with all $600, whatever it might be. We've sent probably, hundreds upon hundreds of cases over the last 4 years, and about 90% of the time they're filled. And that's just 100 people in our community. I really do think that there's a lot more opportunities if it's coordinated well, if it's done ethically and thoughtfully, for that kind of support to happen. And so that listserv has stepped up more than ever during COVID. And so I would simply note that half of the funding we're receiving for relief right now comes from grants. The other half is coming through individuals, congregations, and especially through this listserv. And so we are committed as an agency to providing something closer to $10,000 to $12,000 a month until the end of the year. For us, that's a big deal. I know it's still a small drop in the bucket. It's primarily meant for the newcomer community who may not have, again, government assistance or other resources due to their status. And we're making that commitment because we know and believe that our community is going to be able to meet that. We don't know how long any kind of special grant funding is going to last. So, and we think we can even grow that. We're also going to be paying the government filing fees for about 50 DACA students coming up, so that families don't have to worry about that and maybe can use that money instead for rent. So again, confident a lot of the solutions can come from within our own community. I greatly appreciate, again, everybody on this call and your willingness to listen, and I look forward to learning more from you. Thanks.
David, thank you so much, and thank you to all the presenters. That kind of information that you guys have shared with us today was exactly what we had in mind and hoped to hear, and I hope the attendees have gotten a lot out of it. We have some questions that have been accumulating in the chat. Thank you. And I'm going to take those. What I'll do is mention the name of the person asking the question. I think some of the questions may have been answered within the chat, but if the question is still alive, I'll ask that person to ask his question, and it can be directed to the presenters, or we'll crowdsource it to the assembled participants. Richard Poole, did you have a question, or did that get answered?
I believe I'm going to go offline with Andrew Young on that one.
Okay.
I'd point out that both Andrew and Carolyn Biggerstaff, both on the Minimum Housing Standards Committee, are on. Carolyn or Andrew, do you either want to just say something briefly for the rest of the folks about minimum housing and how it plays a role in keeping the quality of housing in Greensboro, or addressing the housing quality?
I'm going to see if Carolyn can speak to this. She's got the experience. Or if she doesn't say anything, I guess I can say something, but let's see if Carolyn can come on the line.
Carolyn, you're muted. Andrew, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, okay, so I'll just give the basics. The Minimum Housing Standards Commission, I think, consists of, I think, at least 9 of us. We are appointed by the City Council. Each of the City Council members gets to put one of their folks on or to get them nominated and voted in. I believe that the actual inspectors and the division in the city that's doing all this inspection work, they've been going through a lot of what seem to be some pretty good changes. The inspectors have been given more initiative following the Summit Cone fire that killed all those kids. And it seems like that has, worked with your center as well, Stephen, has really maybe pushed the city along, at least when it comes to the minimum housing stuff. As it relates to this eviction stuff and everything, I mean, I think that's a bit of a separate issue, but because we don't deal with that kind of stuff. We're not seeing eviction cases, but it's all about the standard stuff. So I hope that just gives a general overview.
Thank you. Bernita Sims, I don't want to put you on the spot, but Welfare Reform Liaison Project was mentioned a couple of times already today. And I wondered if you might want to make a comment about the community service block grants and about those issues around collaboration between agencies that you and I have talked about and that Josie raised.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for allowing me to say a couple of words. I'm kind of like Josie. When I get going, man, it's hard to stop. But we are a community action agency in Guilford County. We are Guilford County's community action agency, and there's one for each county in the state of North Carolina. And our agencies receive what are called community service block grant dollars, and these dollars are used primarily for programs and services that move people from poverty to self-sufficiency. And so in the past, I think we were sort of in a certain kind of category of how you provide the services. Most of it was training and employment type services, and then supportive services for those individuals who were enrolled in our programming. And over the years, we've kind of had to look at and revamp what we're doing with our services, because we find that the issues around poverty are a little bit deeper than finding somebody a job and putting them to work. There are other things that are required, such as behavioral and mental health services for some families. Poverty can run very deep sometimes, and so it takes changing that mindset with individuals to get them to a place where the thought processes are different. But as it relates to COVID, when the pandemic first happened, we were fortunate in that we were able to realign our current grant, the grant we had for 2019-2020, to accommodate adding emergency services, because at that point we were not able to do the training and employment services because everybody was working from home. So our grantor allowed the realignment. We put those dollars into emergency services. So we've been offering these types of services since March, primarily focusing on the evictions, utilities, childcare, food and nutrition services, and trying to help people as best we could with that. The issue that we had with it was getting the word out on the street. And so we went through a real aggressive marketing campaign with the radio stations, the TV stations. We contacted the court system and said, how can we get this information out so that individuals who are already in the pipeline for eviction understand that there's a way out and that we can assist them with this based on our eligibility guidelines. So it was tough getting that information out, and it was a slow process to get up to speed with helping individuals, even to the point of reaching out to some landlords and say, hey, look, we've got a program, let your residents know that they can contact us and we can work through this process. So we have been blessed that not only do we have our standard grant, which is what we get every year, but through CARES and C and the $26 million that was allotted to CSBG across, well, actually it was $1 billion allotted to CSBG across the country, North Carolina received $26 million of that $1 billion NC CARES Act money. And so as an agency, we received dollars to actually do emergency services in Guilford County. not necessarily as a result of COVID and not necessarily to individuals who were impacted by COVID, but it was to assist and help families and individuals who were suffering as a process of COVID being here. So you didn't necessarily have to be an individual who says, because I lost my job, I cannot pay my rent. We were helping everybody who came to us, meeting our eligibility guidelines with those areas within that grant. So 77% of the dollars that we received have been allocated to emergency services. Included in that were behavioral and mental health services, a good portion of that, because we realize that as individuals go through this, families need to be mentally well and healthy as they try to navigate and come out on the other side of what's happening with this pandemic. In addition to that, we still added dollars for employment services, upskilling, because we understand that some individuals will not go back to the traditional or the jobs that they held before the pandemic happened. So we put in place a pre-apprenticeship piece that allows individuals to then work with trying to get their CDL licensing, construction licensing. We have 8 certifications that go with our construction program, the healthcare careers field, all of that we're going to be working on through this period. The other fortunate part of what our NC Cares dollars do is that our program is over 26 months. So we're not tied into the emergency funding that came out through the CARES Act that went to the cities and the counties where they had until December 30th to spend these dollars. Our dollars will be over the next 26 months. So we're kind of running two grants simultaneously. We're running our standard grant, which comes every year, along with the CARES Act dollars that we received. So in that regard, I look at the pandemic as an unfortunate thing that has happened to everybody. And I know that families are suffering and that they're hurting. But one of the things I think that has come out of all of this is the ability to partner with organizations that heretofore we never knew existed, and to be able to come together in a collaborative effort to say, what's the best way for us to address the issues that are now coming to bear in the communities that we live in, we work in. And so in that regard, because of the pandemic, I met Josie. Because of meeting Josie, we've had conversations around legal aid and what that means with our Community Action Association and with Health and Human Services at the state level. We're now looking at how can community action now partner with legal aid so that we're doing comprehensive work towards how we get people in places where they're not faced with eviction or losing their homes or all of those things that happen as a result of, all of the stress that's being placed on these families. And believe me, it is stressful to a family when you're trying to figure out, how am I going to make this happen? How do I feed my family? How do I even think about going back to work when I look at social distancing and all the other things that go along with it? We had a gentleman who came to us for assistance with his rent. And in the process of his conversation, he says, I don't know if I can even go back to work because I just don't want anybody taking care of my son. I'm particular about what's going to happen with him and how will my son be impacted in the child care arena with me going back to work. So there are lots of things and moving parts that are happening with COVID, but I am, again, so excited about being able to work with agencies across Guilford County and how we craft and draft a plan to move towards recovery, what that's going to look like, and then how we, again, leverage the dollars that are coming into our community to make sure we're making the best use of these funds that have been given to us. And I have always struggled with, us not being more collaborative in the work that we do. We have several agencies out here that are all doing emergency services. How do we know if we're not helping families 2 and 3 and 4 times? Not to say that we shouldn't be, but along with what we do with our assistance also comes case management. So we look at it and say, let's talk to this family about how we got here, what we're going to do when we assist you with this, and how we're going to move forward. And if we pay 2 months of your rent, what's your plan for next month? What's your plan for the month after? And then how do we address that in the scheme of things and develop a plan for that family to say how we move forward. So again, I think there's lots of good work that's being done. I think that we have some very, very smart people out here with our agencies working with families and working with individuals to try to navigate this new thing that we have going on. And, you know, I always look at it and say, you know, we're in a place, but eventually, you know, the end line is going to move, or the end of that is going to move. And where are we going to be when we get to that finish line? And I'm really concerned about us coming together and having real meaningful discussions and dialogue about how we do that. Community actions realm is not emergency services. So I want us to understand that we're operating in a place and space that typically we don't do. Community action is more around building community initiatives. It's more around helping individuals in that move from poverty to self-sufficiency, upskill and get jobs that pay living wages and that pay wages that can take care of your families. And so that has been our focus. And now we're in a new place and a new space. So I'm looking at all of these agencies that routinely do emergency services to help us navigate what it is we're doing and make sure that, you know, we're serving these families in the best way possible, and that at the end of the day, we're getting the highest and best use of the funds that have been awarded to us. So having said that, that's all I have. And again, I appreciate you all inviting me to be a part of this discussion.
Thanks, Benita. Latoya Alston, do you have a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I think my question was answered from several of these representatives, but I didn't really get the full understanding of what New Jerusalem offers to the community. Can that representative kind of run that past me again? I am familiar with Benita Sims and the Faith Action community, Housing Coalition as well, and Greensboro Urban Ministry, but I didn't catch what services New Jerusalem had to offer my underserved families.
Hi, this is Mesita. New Jerusalem is a local church here in Greensboro, and we have a homeless prevention program that did receive COVID dollars through the United Way. And so providing, same thing with all of the other wonderful agencies who we've always collaborated with David at Faith Action and Tyra and Robeline and at the Greensboro Housing Coalition regarding financial assistance for rental eviction, utility disconnection, and other basic needs for individuals experiencing crisis, to same concept of providing stability, housing stability.
Okay, that's wonderful. I did attach my email into the chat, so if anyone could send me or if I can go on the website and get it. I like to distribute this to some of the families that I work with, as well as take it through the neighborhoods that I service as well, and share this information with them. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Latoya and Mesita. Grant, do you have a question? Grant Duffield?
I think he's gone offline.
Brett Byerly, do you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My question, I don't see any City of Greensboro representatives on the call. I could be wrong, but kind of going back to what Josie had said about allocations from the City of Greensboro coming down for CARES Act towards rental assistance. Is there any indication, do we know when that money is going to hit the agencies? As somebody who knows a little bit about that, you know, you spend a lot of time being frustrated because you want to get money down to people and help people from being evicted, and you're kind of waiting on the city and the federal government to make those dollars available. So is there any indication of what that timeline might be?
Brett, this is Bernita. And what I will say is the federal government's money is already here. They've already dispersed what they're going to do. to the counties and to the city. The county has already dispersed what it's going to disperse to the cities. So the money's already out there. And quite a bit of it is already being allocated to agencies that have responded to RFPs from through community development in High Point, and then also through the United Way agencies. So I'm not sure exactly what the holdup is with the city. I don't believe that they're waiting on the funds. I just don't know if they probably organized how they want to make that disbursement happen. But it's a good question as to why it's not there, because all of this has been hurry up and get this money on the street, even with our CARES dollars. So we ended up with a 1 week to turn around our grant application. We had a sort of a lead with trying to get the needs assessment done. That was a process of that. So they told us to go ahead and start with that process. So we had a 3-week lead on the needs assessment. But the actual grant application itself, we had to have ready with a turnaround of 1 week. And 1 week from the day that we submitted those grants, those dollars were in our hands. So I'm not quite sure what the process is with the city and why there is a holdup, but I think that's a great question to go to Assistant City Manager Chris Wilson and try to figure out what the process is and why it is taking so long for those dollars to be distributed. It is my understanding they wanted that money out before the beginning of the next fiscal year. So the county's money was out and about as early as the latter part of April, beginning of May. I'm not sure what this holdup is.
And I can say, just from our agency's experience and what I know, the agencies that were designated to receive the CARES Act money from the city, I think there are some that received it and some that have not. I know our agency has not received it yet. As Bernita said, that they're, the money, they've been allocated the money, they have the money, they know which agencies are going to receive it. The process that I have gone through, so I can't speak for other agencies who are waiting to receive that funding, because of the guidelines that they were being held to from the federal level. It was even a to-do over the flyer. So I know some people had mentioned, like, how do we get this word out to the agencies? It wasn't as simple as GHC staff creating a flyer and putting that out. I was not able to create a flyer to put it out yet because I haven't even signed a contract yet to receive the funding. And the city of Greensboro has been working with our staff to even create the flyer, because they are being really specific about the criteria and the qualifications and what they can put on there as far as the requirement even for the landlord for their tenant to receive. So I think that may place a role in that. I don't know what that's looking like per agency, but I know with us, it's been a very meticulous process, to say the least. The last information that I just got was actually this, the beginning to midweek of this week. I did get the final draft from them. I had to ask them to make some suggestions, some edit suggestions for that flyer. The application that will be used, that will be made public, and it would actually be on our website, so someone can actually fill it out and return it via email or either fax. We just finalized that. And so from that point, I believe if they approve my changes that I had to ask them to make because they had wording on there that didn't even fit our agency, once that's done, I believe that then they can get with me and our deputy director to sign the contracts, and then we can go from there. So again, you know, to Ms. Sims' point, I thought maybe we would have had it by now, but I do think that they are being very meticulous about this process, which has slowed things up. But I will say, we too received United Way funds. I've mentioned that a few times. And we have been servicing people who are at risk of being evicted and people who need rental assistance and utility assistance. So you can refer them to our agency. And again, we do have that eviction resolution program that can assist whether someone is a COVID-19 impact or not. I will say they still have to meet the criteria. The eviction resolution program can offer up to $2,000 in assistance over a period of time. And again, they still have to come through our process, and then legal aid will actually they work with us every single week and review each individual case on how they can assist that client. So it's just a matter of referring it and going through. And just one more thing that's not good, but I mentioned this earlier. We have had tenants coming in that need assistance. And like I mentioned earlier, they're behind 3, 4, 5 months, well, 4, 5, 6 months. In the realm of COVID-19 funding, and I can say as far as the city funding that we will be getting from the CARES Act, if they are behind past before April, they wouldn't meet the criteria for that funding. So just so you know, that's where we are with that, which is why partnering with people like Ms. Sims and working through the eviction resolution program, that's why those programs are needed to leverage so we can create as much relief as possible. We have noticed that where we cannot or we're not able to assist through rental assistance, I've actually been working with even Cone Health. I actually had a conversation with their director of philanthropy because my thing is, we have got to find ways to close the gaps. Everyone that comes to us, unfortunately, we will not be able to assist only because of the guidelines that we're held to, and we have to operate with integrity and good stewardship. But that doesn't mean we don't try to find out ways to close those gaps by figuring out creative ways to help mitigate eviction or help preserve housing. The case that I mentioned earlier with the young lady that hasn't been able to work since January, and she is actually 3.5 months rent behind. Her balance is over $2,200. We were able to assist her because with the help of one organization leveraged half of that. We leveraged the other half, but not through any funding program we have. We leveraged half of that because of donations. So we created a community support fund specifically for closing the gaps. And so we are able to assist her through leveraging from a resource from another organization and through our community support fund. And that's why we're trying to share that and put that out there to let people know. All of these agencies on this call, I'm sure would greatly appreciate any donations and so we can close those gaps, because without it, we just will not be able to serve our community in the way that we need to serve them. So we're doing all that we can with what we have and working within the guidelines that what we are asked to do. But we have to find those creative ways. I mentioned earlier about our immigrant refugee population. Even our response to that group, that population has to be different. The materials, I was working with the Montagnard Dago Association. I'm working with them to create everything that we have in the different dialects of the Montagnard. We have someone on staff that speaks Spanish, and so she's working to create all our materials in Spanish, because we just have to respond differently in order to create the most positive impact that we can. And so just keeping all that in mind as you send referrals to us, we'll do everything that we can to help serve that client.
Thanks, Josie. The next question was Lane Brown's. I think Lane had to leave, but I'll put the question and begin at least a partial answer to it. The question was, what is the role of the county commissioners in all of this? What I can say is that the county, Guilford County, because it's a large county, was entitled to receive a direct allotment from the CARES Act Coronavirus Relief Fund, an allocation of $93 million. So there has been much discussion in the county among housing advocates and who have been working to try to get the commissioners to dedicate some of that $93 million to housing relief. And for the most part, they were not amenable. They allocated the bulk of that $93 million to county expenses incurred in as a result of the COVID epidemic, which is a legitimate coronavirus relief fund expense. Grants to city and town governments, some grants to nonprofit organizations, including United Ways, and I think, but I may be mistaken, it's a little hard to tell, that some of the $5 million that the county commissioners granted to United Way did get further distributed to the agencies for housing relief purposes, but maybe others can speak to that.
That would be incorrect. I just didn't want that to keep going on, Bruce. That would be, I just put in chat. So Guilford County received the money that you're speaking of, and I just put in chat so everyone would have a go-to. And so there is money that was able to go to nonprofits for assistance through the United Way. Believe it or not, housing was not one of the priorities designated for that money. The priority areas for that money was medical supplies or medical assistance, supplies like PPE supplies, food insecurity, and I believe there's one more. Housing was not a priority in that, public health. So public health, medical supplies, and food insecurity. Housing was not one of the priorities in that funding allocation that went to the United Way. So you're right, there has been a lot of discussion over why that is, particularly when one of their priorities is public health. Everyone on this call can agree that housing is a public health issue, but it wasn't particularly, it did not come through a health priority for that. Now, the difference is the previous funding that the United Way received, I think many of you may be aware from the money that we received earlier and other organizations received earlier on. Now, those priorities did include housing, but this particular bucket from Guilford County did not. And that's the link that I shared with you guys. So you can apply at that link, but just look at the eligibility requirements and things of that nature.
This is Lindy Garnett with the YWCA. The county did provide a small amount, and it was a small amount of emergency funding through that CARES Act money for emergency housing needs, motels, shelters, those kinds of things. That money was not part of the pot of money that was channeled through United Way for nonprofits. It was a separate pot of money that was funneled through the continuum of care and allocated by request and proposals that were submitted to the continuum of care specifically for that pot of money. So there was the housing money was carved out. It was not a part of that nonprofit pool. It was a separate pool, but that was all run through the continuum of care. So if folks didn't apply through that mechanism, then they were out of luck. And I don't know how that was advertised or how people learned about that money being available. And again, it was a fairly, in the big scheme of things, it was a fairly small amount of money, but there was a little bit of money carved out.
I think the biggest issue that people have brought about this is that it was such a small share when 20 million of the 90 million was allocated for COVID relief for businesses. While we need people back employed, the employment issue is a public health issue. And as Josie pointed out, housing is a public health issue, and keeping people at home in homes is our largest public health issue, rather than no interest loans to businesses. I think there's a philosophical difference in the county on how the money is spent, keeping businesses viable when there's no customers versus keeping people alive and in their homes. And the money allocation kind of tells you where the vote landed.
To your point, Stephen, I will say this. I think that when it comes down to dollars that flow from federal resources, and then if they flow through the state, or even if they flow directly into agencies like the city and the county. The interpretation of the intent is what gets us all hung up into regarding how we get those dollars on the street or how we disseminate money. And so when you receive dollars and those dollars say, these dollars have to be used for individuals who have suffered XYZ as a result of COVID. So then you go back to having families and individuals prove that whatever this situation is that occurred with them happened because of COVID. Mm-hmm. And so I think when you get that narrow an interpretation, because I could say, I just think that everything that anybody is suffering today is because of COVID. That's just my interpretation of all of that. If there were no COVID, then we could be clear and draw the line and say how this situation occurred or did not occur. But as we've gone through these last months with the whole COVID pandemic and the news cycle and the continuous information around social distancing and hand washing and wearing masks and the whole 9 yards, I look at it and say, I don't know if there's anybody on this planet that has not been impacted by what is going on with the coronavirus. That's just my feeling. And so lucky for us, when our grant was put in, it wasn't so narrowly interpreted that you had to go in and an individual had to prove that whatever happened to you was because of COVID. So we took a more lax interpretation of what that meant and said, if you lost your job and you can't pay your rent, or if you quit your job and you can't pay your rent, at the end of the day, we're going to help you pay your rent. Because we can't start getting into the questioning around what happened, when it happened, how it happened, who was involved, how many people were a process of you not keeping your job, all of that. Families were impacted when they had to stay home with children, schools being out, the whole 9 yards. So I think some of that gets into that very narrow interpretation of how people look at it and say, is it COVID related? All of these dollars that you sent to us and everything that's happening in the community, in my opinion, is COVID related. And so when you start moving and playing around with how you access these COVID dollars, to me, that sends another whole message to the community. Hence, we didn't apply for any of that money because it would have sent my blood pressure out of the roof. And I didn't want that to happen because, at the end of the day, we're just trying to help these individuals and keep people in a space and a place where at least there is a thought of recovery in their minds. And I just think it does an injustice when you look at an application this week and it has these areas that you can apply for, and then you go back the next week and they removed one. Yeah. Well, what is that about? And so I think we need to, as nonprofit agencies, and walk in what we do and how we do it, and start flexing our muscles. I'm not a militant person, but I am an advocate, and I just think that together, collectively, we have more power than we even realize that we have, as it relates to the work that we do. And if we don't start taking our place in this whole conversation, then we're going to be in trouble, because the individuals that are literally doing the work are the nonprofits. So the government can sit back all day long and, say we're going to allocate money and all that. We're the boots on the ground doing the work. When I look at United Way, bless their souls, I think that's a great organization, but they're not doing the work. We're the ones that are seeing individuals come through our doors, call on the phone, tell us about all these issues that are going on in their communities and in their homes. And I just think that at some point we have to walk in who we are and what we are. So that's my soapbox speech for the day, Josie. And so at the end of the day, I just think that we've got to do a better job of letting our voices be heard as it relates to how this process works.
We always appreciate your soapbox, Bernita. I think Bruce has 5 more questions, and we're past our 1:30 time. If people want to hang in with us here, we're going to go up to 2 o'clock, and we'll try to move through these next questions quickly and efficiently.
The next question was from Bill Rowe.
Yes, I was just wondering, there's this non-congregate housing program that DHHS has set up, and they're still taking applications, and it's FEMA funded, and it's to place folks who, instead of being in a homeless shelter, in motels, and to then provide supportive services to help them get into better housing. And I know it's spotty around the state how that's being done because it's just by application. But Orange County, I was on a call with the other day, and they had some great stories and success. But I heard the discussion about a lot of people being in motels and the need for it, but whether that money is being accessed in Greensboro or Guilford County or not.
I just put a link in there, Bill. I'm not sure. I believe this is what you're referring to. If you click on that, and then that might be what you're referring to. The non-congregate sheltering was on the North Carolina DHSS website. Is that?
And I don't know if you all have looked into it or not, or there's interest, but I think they're still taking applications. So and could put you in touch with some other folks who have been working on it. Also in Orange County, particularly next door somewhat, they have had some good success so far, particularly with long-term helping folks. It's not just setting somebody up in a motel, but it's also trying to work on trying to get them into some housing and get some services for folks. But it's just cut down on the danger of having the congregate housing that we've been operating under forever.
Jerome had a question about including landlords in the solutions we're working toward here. Jerome, do you want to ask that question? Jerome Myers, let's see.
See Jerome still on. If you want to click your mute button, unmute button.
I'm going to try to find the question and I'll put it to the group.
I have it right here. I have several people in my community with balances over $2,000. While I'm trying to be understanding and kind, what is reasonable as a landlord? And who can he work with for solutions?
I would say that he should be referring them to the agencies who are able to provide the assistance. I know that one of the guidelines that is to come in the funding allocation that we are receiving from the city for the CARES Act, that assistance is based off of the income of the individual, and it's up to $1,500 for rental, and there's up to $1,000, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, for utility assistance. So in that regard, if this was a client that met the criteria, we could actually leverage to assist him with one program up against another. I am working with agencies like Salvation Army, where we will provide as much as we can, and then the other agency will provide as much as they can. Again, that goes back to understanding what agency is doing what and us coordinating between each other to see what we can do. There are 2 clients that we were able to assist where their balance was over $2,000. So I won't say that we can't help, but they do have to come in, have to call in, do the intake process, and we will leverage whatever we can to assist, because we do understand that although there is a guideline that says we can go back only to April, or we may have to do this, just as Ms. Sims says, we recognize that this was something that was going on before April, and we recognize the impact that was going on before COVID hit, and now it's being exacerbated. So we are looking at the cases very closely to see how we can work with others to leverage to create as much relief as possible. We have seen cases where we have been able to provide a month, 2 months rent, and the client was very cooperative and allowed us to work with them in a way that aligned when they were getting their unemployment benefit. And so there were cases where the client was like so appreciative that we were able to take them up to this far, and they were like, I got it as soon as I get this unemployment benefit. And so it's a case-by-case basis, but please refer them to the agencies who are providing that, and we will do all we can to assist.
Josie, I appreciate you saying that. I think my bigger challenge is for the people with the largest balances are unresponsive, like their cell phones have been turned off. But, you know, if we have a maintenance ticket, we'll see them and their guests at the apartment. And so it's just like, what do you do with those people? Because as soon as we go to court, then legal aid is sitting in the back and they're helping people figure out ways on how not to be evicted. And it's like this vicious cycle of, all right, well, they're not paying their rent, we can't evict them. And I mean, there's expenses with running the building. And I mean, is it truly the expectation that landlords pay for people to live in the property? Or like, I mean, it's really frustrating for me because I don't want people on the street, but in the same breath, like I still have mortgages to pay. I still have to operating expenses for all the utilities and all the other stuff that we have to cover as well. And getting zero rent for some cases, 6 months is not okay.
I will say, Jerome, I do understand, wholeheartedly understand both sides, and probably more than what people think. I used to do property management, and so I do understand both sides, which is why I think our advocacy, GHC is known for, you know, advocating for folks. And I do think when we are looking at this, I just spoke with a group of organizers yesterday that are doing some things in Forsyth and in Orange County. And my thing is, if we don't, we have to advocate comprehensively, but our approach has to be comprehensive. I understand that the property owners need assistance as well. And so my advocacy point is to work with organizations that are C4s that can go a little bit step further on the legislative level than what a regular 501c3 can. Because at the end of the day, if there's not a stay across the board, it's not enough to put a moratorium for a renter when the landlord is also suffering themselves. So I do see the point. And I would say what you're speaking of as far as individuals that you may not be able to reach because maybe their cell phone is turned off or maybe they're being unresponsive. I really can't say how to manage that because I mean, I think that there is different things at play here. I have seen people just be at a sense of hopelessness and they don't want to respond and they have literally given up. And so they're just sitting there not moving and not doing anything because they don't feel like they can get the help that they need. We have individuals where their phones have been turned off because they're making decisions on whether or not they're going to pay their rent, whether or not they're going to eat, whether or not they're going to feed their children, or whether or not they're going to keep a cell phone on. And so I can tell you what I have seen other landlords do. We have worked with, and we are working with landlords that created their own letter. And a letter went out to all their tenants, and a letter listed the organizations who are providing assistance, and we were on that. So a lot of our referrals are coming from landlords that have put out letters to their tenants, and they just went across the board. Some we've been able to help, some we've been able to partner with organizations. Some we could help if the tenant is responsive and return the documentation that we need, and in some cases they don't do that. So I would just, you know, I do understand your point, and I don't know if that approach will work for you as far as doing a letter to your tenants, but we do have a couple of landlords that did that, and And we have seen a landlord that owns a multi-unit complex. We've worked with landlords that has a few homes, and we've worked with some property management companies where they have been referring their clients. There's one in particular, a property management company. We've helped 6 of his tenants. So I can only tell you to refer them to us and the other agencies, and then we'll just go from there.
Yeah, I mean, we did do a letter early on, and I guess maybe we should circle back to that strategy. It's really frustrating. Like I ran to the delinquency report yesterday, and some people owe $5,000. They can't catch up, and they probably can't go anywhere else if we evict them. So, I mean, what do you do? It's not that we don't care, but like, what do you do?
I think, Mr. Myers, that what happens in that instance is that we all come together and collectively leverage our resources to see if we can't help those families. And you'd be surprised, 5,000 may look daunting at the moment, but based on the literally the amount of money that is currently out there for COVID-related issues, particularly around evictions and individuals owing rent, may not be so hard to get to that number as it relates to your situation. You just have to know how to go, where to go and how to get there. And again, one of our challenges, I think, in all of this is information. We're not doing a very good job of getting information out regarding the actual amount of services that are available and where individuals need to go. And I think there was a question earlier where someone asked, was there a task force, or was there one place, central place of information available to individuals who are experiencing these issues? And I would say the answer to that is no. I don't think that we have done in Guilford County a very good job of saying what, when, where, and how, and telling folks how they access this information. And we've got to do better. I don't know what that looks like, but I think we need to do a better job of it. Otherwise, the question that you just asked and the situation that you find yourself in is going to be somewhat the same thing that all of our landlords are going to be experiencing as we move through this.
I think Jerome points out, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think that Jerome points out something that's especially important right now. Typically, these roles are adversarial between landlords and the advocacy organizations. And right now, they need to be cooperative. A payback plan might work for $1,000 or $1,500 over the course of the year, and the landlord extends that. Josie extending $2,000, Bernita extending $1,500, Urban Ministries extending $500, somebody picking up the utilities, but in collaboration with the landlords who their bottom line is being affected. It's not good for anybody, tenant, advocacy organizations, the system and its costs, nor the landlord, for us to evict anyone.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just be completely transparent. Like with what's still due in July, like $50,000 is on the street, and I don't know if we're going to collect that. Right? So for some people, that's a small number. For other people, it's a really large number. And I mean, there's real impact. And I think we are better off right now than we really should be. But because the government put money in the street and they got the extra unemployment benefits and so on, but I think it's artificial and very temporary. And so what is really going to happen in August, September, October, when that stuff gets turned off, or even after the election when it could be completely turned off? Like that part for me is really scary. And, you know, I'm not the biggest owner in Greensboro, but we do have a significant portfolio.
We had time for one more.
I think Marianne was raising her hand.
Yeah, two things. I wonder if, Jerome, you would be eligible for those small business kinds of money that is allocated in the CARES Act. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, have we approached Duke Power and the electric companies and asked them to forego their utilities for this period? So I know the landlords were asked, to, you know, not collect and not to evict. But, you know, Duke Power is a huge organization. Do they have a foundation that they can tap into to pay electric bills for people and gas bills? So that's my recommendation. We look into that in some way. Thank you. And I need to go now. Oh, thank you.
Well, we are out of time. We did get through 99% of the questions, so thank you all for fielding those. We will have, this has been recorded, and we'll have the file if anybody would like to have a copy of that. I think I can send it to you if you let me know. I put my email address in the chat just now. The recording, I think, will include the contents of the chat, which is good because there's a lot of good stuff in there today. So thank you again to the presenters for donating your time and really making this a very useful and informative mini symposium. And thanks to all the participants. The sun is looking to me like it's shining, so please, I hope everybody enjoy the rest of your July 4th holiday. And with that, we'll conclude. Thank you all.
Next month, August 7th, and look for us on Facebook, Eventbrite. We'll be sending out information shortly about the next housing hangout. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.